and welcome to Execute Chapter 66, a Star Wars fiction podcast where we discuss canon, legends, possibly comics, video games, much, much more. With me, as always, are Chad Schonk and Ryan Schweck, so over to you, Chad.
This is just a reminder that this is a book club, not a review show. So we expect you to have done the reading or to not care about spoilers. In addition, we may be discussing other Star Wars stories out there, up to and including the final season of Clone Wars. So you've been warned. So head of research, Ryan, any Star Wars news has come about? Has there been any Star Wars news that come about since the last time we spoke?
So much.
Yeah, there's been a lot.
Yeah, there's been a lot in the realm of fiction and both, the books and on the Disney Plus TV side of things and some toys. The first, they have announced the next audiobook is going to be a Dr. Aphra. So kind of in the same way they did Jedi Lost about Dooku, they will do Dr. Aphra, which again I think shows they're starting to push her more and more. She got a big launch of a new comic book in the past, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, and now the audio drama will come out in the fall. And,
it's the only Marvel comic that's come out in the past 2 months.
Yeah, they're geared
literally the only Marvel, but it's the only Marvel comic, and they put it out on the 4th. They put it out on May the 4th.
Yeah,
it's the day it dropped, but it's the only comic they put out.
And I'm assuming they will eventually publish the script of it like they did with Jedi Lost. But I'm looking forward to it. I really like Aphra. I wasn't too impressed with the first issue of the new series, but it's just the first one, so we will see. And then in the many Disney Plus announcements, starting with the Cassian Andor show, Mon Mothma is going to be in it. They have, and I cannot remember her name offhand, but
Geraldine something. It's Geraldine something.
Yeah, who plays Mon Mothma in Rogue One will reprise the role for Cassian.
And in Revenge of the Sith.
Yep. So that's good. I mean, I assumed they would do that. There are rumors going around that Bail Organa will also be in it, but we'll have to see. They have the family of Carrie Fisher announced this week that they have requested that her likeness no longer be used in any Star Wars shows, or I think they were okay with the Rise of Skywalker, to finish it off and kind of what they did. But past that, they've requested that she not be digitally put in any movies or anything else. I
would also request that. I would also request that.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then
Genevieve O'Reilly, by the way.
And then on the many rumors and casts for The Mandalorian and possible other shows, we are going to get old Sackhoff for Bo-Katan, who will also be in The Mandalorian Season 2.
I am very excited for that.
Yeah. Now,
Are you upset if you're Ashley Eckstein? Are you upset if you're Ashley Eckstein?
After watching videos of her and seeing her, I just don't think she has the right look to play it in real life.
Yeah, and
I can see that she'd be upset.
Yeah, Katie's an actress on live action shows already,
yeah.
So it's not like a jump that she's just a voice actor moving over to being on a show. But, I think it's good. I think she'll look. I mean, she already kind of looks like Bo-Katan on Clone Wars anyway, so that's kind of an easy.
If it's on The Mandalorian, we may never see her face anyway.
That's true. Another breaking story that actually came out yesterday. So one of the sources that first reported that Boba Fett was possibly going on The Mandalorian. which happened also while...
I was going to say, we're not going to talk about Tamara Morrison?
Yeah, I forgot about that. Tamara Morrison is now going to be on The Mandalorian. What I find interesting is that sites reported he's playing Boba Fett, and I guess that's kind of confirmed. They've said that it's possibly the guy in, was that episode 8? but I'm still holding out that he might play Rex. We'll see. I mean, I'm just not a huge fan of Boba Fett, and I just don't need Boba Fett on The Mandalorian. I don't want it to overshadow things. Even with all these other announcements of all these people coming on to The Mandalorian, I don't know. To me, it's starting to feel a little crowded and kind of back to that Star Wars is a small universe. You know what I mean? And that
everything doesn't have to tie together.
Yeah.
Some things can be separate.
I think they're just going to be appearances, though. I don't think they're going to be regular cast members.
Yeah, we were kind of joking. It would be funny if it was just the Mandalorian goes into like a cantina and you just see like Sabine and Ahsoka and Rex sitting at a table. Yeah. And that's it. They just walk by and the end.
I mean, they put out a press release when they cast Ming-Na in season 1. Not right. And then she was in one episode. You know, like there were several people that they were like, hey, this person's on The Mandalorian. You're like, well, no, they did a guest spot on The Mandalorian. Yeah. So I suspect a lot of these are going to be guest spots.
And Bo-Katan now being on it kind of makes me think more and more it's going to be some sort of flashback with the Darksaber.
It really could be.
You could just show like, you know, kind of how the Darksaber got to where it is and what it is, and then move on.
Are we gonna watch Gus Fring kill Bo-Katan?
I hope not. That would be sad. Yeah. But going along with that, so the site that seems to have pretty reliable sources, you know, who kind of reported some of this early, did report yesterday that there is a new series in the works headed by Filoni, and it is the live-action sequel to Rebels. That this is kind of, you know, it's one of those introduce them on The Mandalorian, and then here's your new show.
Backdoor pilot.
It will be the search for Ezra. So we'll see. Yeah, I think with the COVID we've talked about before, it's so weird that these are probably announcements that were planned for San Diego and Celebration. And without those, you know, they're trying to figure out how to do them, and they're all getting leaked out.
To be fair, they also have to figure out how to shoot them.
Right.
I mean, Hollywood is still shut down, and they are racking their brains right now. I know Steven Soderbergh, who is, I don't know if he's president of the DGA right now, but he's high up. He's got a panel. They're trying to figure out how are they going to shoot movies anytime soon. How they're going to shoot TV. So what you're seeing in the news is a lot of deals being made. I mean, if you go on, it's tons of deals, tons of people signing, tons of movies. You know, so and so signing to this show, and so and so is doing this movie, but none of them are actually being made yet. None of them. So I remain optimistic, but I have no idea how many movies they're going to make next year, how many TV shows they're going to make next year. So.
Right. Well, and speaking of movies, I can't remember if we talked about this on the last one. I don't think so.
We did not.
Old Waititi is going to get his own Star Wars movie. I like him. I think he's funny. I think when he kind of is able to reel in his comedy, like we've talked about on the main podcast, he's really good. But there's always that danger of him going too overboard on comedy. But I'll tell you, after that I guess it was the first episode of the Disney Plus Gallery Mandalorian docuseries. Yeah. And kind of watching what he did and them talking about him, it made me feel better about it. Which, by the way, for listeners, if you've not watched the gallery episodes about the making of the Mandalorian, they are amazing and highly recommended.
I haven't watched it yet.
Every time I think I'm going to pause my Disney Plus subscription for a little while, they come out with something else that I have to watch.
So, Chad, you said you have not watched them?
No, not yet. I haven't had time. No, I haven't got
I will tell you, and without, this is not details or anything, at one point, Filoni goes on, I mean, it's probably a good 7 or 8 minutes at least, just talking about the prequels and what he thinks about them and how he sees the story. And it made me ashamed to talk about Star Wars.
Nice.
That's why I said he makes me feel like a poser listening to him talk. I'm like, I don't know a damn thing about Star Wars.
It's just, and it's so funny because he's sitting in a room with all the directors of the show at that point. Like, I mean, big people. I think Kathleen Kennedy's in there, Waititi, Bryce Howard, Jon Favreau. and they just all kind of like are watching him go on this diatribe, like open mouthed, like this is unreal, amazing. But so yeah, definitely watch that.
I will. I think I like Taika quite a bit. I have no problem with this. Even if the movie's goofy, I'm okay with a goofy Star Wars movie. If it would have been Episode 9, then maybe I have a problem with it.
Yeah.
But as a standalone movie that he just gets to take his spin on Star Wars, awesome. Jojo Rabbit was fantastic.
Well, I still haven't seen
his episode. I haven't seen it yet either. But his episode of The Mandalorian that he directed, that final episode, was fantastic. Yeah. He didn't go overboard on the jokes. I thought he did a really good job with it. So that makes me trust him with Star Wars.
Or maybe they'll let him make new canon droids movie. Just bring it on back. And then I guess our final piece of news that we will cover tonight, which is the most exciting piece of news for me personally. If you collect toys, you know that a lot of times we find out what toys are coming out by leaks in computer systems at stores, because they will pre-order, the leaks will go, the UPCs will go into the system. And so whoever these people are, I don't know, bored people at work, I guess, go through and just like search for things. And so what they uncovered is there will be a wave of Star Wars Black Series coming out in August that is a re-release of all the Rebels characters that have come out, which have been pretty hard to find. The Ezra goes for about $100 right now. But in the most exciting news that has happened in a long time.
Are you getting your Zeb?
Zeb is coming out, and he's a deluxe figure.
Oh, I bet he is.
So we finally are getting it. Everyone is ecstatic. You know, the other ones, I've got the other ones. We're hoping they do an upgrade to Ezra, because the Ezra that came out is the season 1 kind of little kid Ezra.
Yeah, so I want buzz cut Ezra.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Usually when they re-release stuff like this, they'll sometimes do little things like that to kind of update them. So people are hoping they'll do buzz cut Ezra and Kanan with the mask.
Oh yeah, blind.
The first one came out. Yeah, he's not blind yet. But I mean, Sabine, you could update her with some different colors, I guess. Hera really didn't change looks, but Zeb is the big story. So
I'm very happy for you.
I know. I'm so happy. I had to go when I went and pre-ordered at GameStop, because you can't search it in the system yet, because it's not a live announced pre-order. But if you have the UPC number, you can be like, I just need you to look up this and pre-order it for me. And I got a funny look. He was like, yep, there it is.
Huh.
Give it to me.
Interesting. Well, that's really cool. Lots of stuff happening. And in addition to that, I mean, we already talked about this on the main podcast, but Clone Wars ended and it was awesome. So go back and listen to that.
Absolutely.
So Beth, what book are we talking about tonight? We haven't even mentioned the book.
Well, we are talking about a book that all of us absolutely love, and we are finally dipping our toes into the world of legends. So we are doing Darth Plagueis this week. I don't know about you guys, but I really do feel like this is probably one of the best written Star Wars books out there. Legend, canon, whatever. One of my favorite Star Wars books of all time.
Oh, absolutely. What's so interesting going back and rereading it too, because it was released, after Revenge of the Sith. And so it was kind of on the tail end of the old canon. And so it's interesting how so many things fit and feel current, where sometimes you read the old books and you're like, oh, this is ridiculous. But it is definitely in that camp of making the prequels better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, James Luceno wrote this, and I think he is the best of the Star Wars novelists by a little bit of a mile. Claudia Gray maybe giving him a run for his money. But I love James Luceno, and yeah, this book is utterly fantastic. I don't like to read books more than once usually. It's just not for me. I tend to get bored the second time through. I read this book for the third time today, and I just tore through it. I just loved every minute of it. So yeah, it's a really great book. So what's it about, Beth?
So this story is about the introduction of Sheev's master, Darth Plagueis, which we only really hear about in a tiny, tiny little scene in Revenge of the Sith. So now we get the full story, And we are starting off with the introduction of Darth Plagueis and his master Darth Tenebris on a planet looking for Crotosis, which actually comes into play in both Thrawn alliances and Master and Apprentice. So, still building up on things that are currently canon. Plagueis quickly takes advantage of a mining explosion to kill his master so that his path to power, true power, can begin. He is already deeply involved in midichlorian and life control experiments, but he gets a new subject after being hunted down by Darth Tenebris' secret apprentice Venemus. But he also has some banking to do, as Higo Damask, who is part of the intergalactic banking clan, and part of his banking revolves around finding new projects, such as a hidden plasma deposit on Naboo. And during this, he meets a young Sheev who senses he could help him with his plans for Naboo and his plans for an apprentice. So what follows is a decades-long game of training and manipulation, as Sheev, of course, has his own plans. So as Plagueis works to install Sheev as Chancellor to rule through him, Sheev's own plan is to rule the entire galaxy alone.
And for the record, his name is not Sheev. Because in this book, we love Sheev, but in this book he's not, because Lucas had yet to name him.
Yeah.
And Lucino was under the orders to not name him himself.
So he is just called Palpatine in this book.
He's just called Palpatine.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucino comes up with a fun way to explain why, but you can so see him jumping through the hoop right on the page.
Yeah.
To try to make it so to get around the fact that you just can't say his first name.
It was kind of a punk out the way he got around it, but, I'll allow it because his hands were quite tied in that. I know George Lucas did have a hand in this book, in some of it anyway. So again, going back to how well this is written, the banking clan machinations and their plotting and stuff, that is not the most exciting of topics. And in another author's hand, this would have been extremely boring stuff. But Lucino writes it in such a way that it's actually kind of compelling, and there's a point to all of it, and it's all important.
Yeah, I mean, this entire book is an adaptation of one scene from Revenge of the Sith.
Mm-hmm.
It's taking what's probably, I guess, the second best scene in all the prequels, behind, like, Duel of the Fates, and takes that entire thing and extrapolates backwards for, 50, 60 years?
Yeah.
From that one moment to tell the tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise. And it's because it's not really Plagueis' book, though, is it?
Oh, no. I mean, he's at the beginning, and then as soon as he meets Palpatine, it's Palpatine's book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is really just a bio of Palpatine.
Yeah, and it really shows how the Republic did fall. Like, the movies and, even Clone Wars and all that. I mean, you see where the Jedi really screwed up. But this shows that it wasn't the Jedi really that were the big cause. Like, Palpatine is behind the scenes with Plagueis the whole time, putting all this stuff into motion. And the way it's laid out, even if the Jedi hadn't screwed up that much, like, it reads like there was a really good chance all this was still going to happen.
Yeah, I think it. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it helps to make me dislike the Jedi less, because so much lately has been making me dislike the Jedi more and more, and just, God, the Jedi are just screwing up so bad, and they're the worst. But there was so much else to it with this book, and it shows how we got to where the Jedi could have screwed up that badly in the first place.
Yeah, I couldn't decide whether someone who hated the trade agreement stuff in Phantom Menace should or shouldn't read this book, because it's a really good version of it, but it's still a bunch of trade agreements. So if you don't think you can get into that, this is not, like you said, the movies and Clone Wars, those are action adventure. shows and movies. This is not an action adventure story. There's little action. It's about political intrigue, and it's about the philosophy of the Sith and things like that. And it's about character, and it's what's weird about it is there's not really an A story. It's kind of episodic in a way. You know, you're just kind of chugging from event to event to event to event, but there's not like a particular arc that you're following, a particular conflict that is resolved. It is just, this is how Palpatine came to be who he is.
Well, and at times we're jumping years too in between chapters.
Yeah, so it feels like a biography sometimes.
Yeah, I think from episode 1, you jump into the Trade Federation stuff in the middle of it. And there's not really a good explanation of how all this is working. Like, why is there this group that can just blockade a planet against the government's wishes and things like that? And so this really fills all that in and lets you see this is why this is such a big deal and how we got to this point with the Federation and the Intergalactic Banking Clan and all those people that become the Separatists, how all those pieces get put into place to make this happen.
Including Dooku, including Sifo Dyas even. It works on the mystery of the Sifo Dyas. What Lucino did do, and like you said, this came out in the wake of Revenge of the Sith, and what Lucino was kind of given was a blank check to fill in a whole bunch of gaps. Now that the movies were over, he got to go back and fill in a whole bunch of stuff. And I
do think I looked up kind of where he started on this book, and I thought it was interesting. Apparently, in the beginning, the book was going to be parallel stories about Palpatine and Qui-Gon. Plagueis. It was going to be Qui-Gon and Plagueis and how they search for immortality. And so you were getting, I guess, he went off that line at the end of Revenge of the Sith where Qui-Gon's figured out a way to communicate, and you were going to see both those things, how the two sides went about it. But they said no. They told him no. But there's not a lot of action in this book, really. I mean, there's some.
There's a few moments, but even the action is described kind of vaguely, though. It'll be like, then Sidious dispatched 4 of them. Mm-hmm. And you're like, how? Oh, I don't care how. That's fine. He killed them. That's fine.
Yeah. Like when he kills his family, it's like you
very vague.
See the action of him killing his father, and then, everybody's dead.
And there's blood everywhere. The end.
Yeah, it does turn out that the artist in the future to be named Sheev was a bloodthirsty monster. Like, kind of from the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of. I mean, he wasn't torturing puppies, although he might have been.
No, he was actually worse in a different way because when Plagueis first meets him, he's a whiny little bitch.
He is. But see, I liked how they presented him because he was also he raced speeders. That's not something that I would necessarily equate to Palpatine. But I don't know, he was just a kid. There were things about his life that I found very fascinating. But you're right, it does do a lot to it. It can be treated. It kind of is just a giant backstory for the Phantom Menace, right? I mean, at least part of the plot is just what is happening in Phantom Menace. I'm going to give you almost in excruciating detail. I can't imagine the whiteboard that Lucino had up when he was writing this thing, trying to figure out how to lay all these pieces in. But he does a masterful job of saying, yeah, that plot that Lucas kind of half-assed, which again, I think part of that's okay because it's an adventure movie. And you just have to know these are the bad guys and these are the good guys. But if you want to know more, here's an incredibly deep dive that is also going to answer questions about lots of other characters. It's going to introduce other characters like, how do you pronounce his name? Prestige?
Sate Pestige. I have enough audiobooks that I've heard his name.
All right, Sate Pestige. And other characters like that. There's a reference to. It is interesting, though. This isn't a canon book anymore. I said this is expanded universe / legends, but there are references to the Clone Wars cartoon, right? Mm-hmm. With Senator Farr, right? The Rhodian senator. who is who is Padme's friend in the Clone Wars, or kind of a friend of the family. He's mentioned in it. So it was written in this kind of weird gray area where the Clone Wars cartoon was still meant to fit in with the expanded universe. And so it's interesting, and it's how it bleeds between those two worlds. What did you think? What I really wanted to talk about more than anything about this book, though, is its depiction of the Sith.
So I have questions, because I am still, after reading this book 4 times, really confused about the rule of 2, because Tenebrous is supposedly keeping to the rule of 2. They say he says he's the last of the Darth Bane Sith.
Yeah, the Darth Bane line. Yeah.
Yeah. But he's got secret apprentices. So is he keeping to the rule of 2? And obviously, Plagueis' plans are to not keep to the rule of 2, and yet he only gets himself 1 apprentice. So I'm confused. The rule
They're
of
bad
2
guys.
still doesn't make any sense.
They're bad guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the rule of 2, basically the rule of 2 is you've got, your master and your apprentice, and then you've always got some, side chicks in the background that you can replace at any point. Yeah, so that way you don't got to worry. One gets knocked off, we got another coming. You're just a temporary placeholder. And they kind of talk about that at one point about Dooku, that Dooku is always meant to be temporary until Anakin is ready.
Yeah.
And
So
Darth Maul's the same. I got Darth Maul over here. He's my assassin friend, and he names him Darth it before he's, I guess officially one of the rule of 2. But
So a Sith apprentice is a bottom bitch, is what you're saying.
yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
I just think it's they have this rule that they teach, but they're also evil people.
Mm-hmm.
And so while the rule of 2 is something that they use to keep their apprentice under control, but meanwhile, they're going to go off and do this, and then the apprentice in the meantime is looking for someone to help them knock off their master, or working on knocking off their master and getting they're just bad guys.
Yeah.
They're just vicious, power hungry monsters. And so that's fine. So that part doesn't bother me, because it's like, they don't go by their own rules.
Well,
neither do I.
Part of the Sith rules that goes along with this, yes, you have the rule of 2, but your other rule is at some point one is supposed to kill the other, and you're supposed to encourage this. That you're supposed to be constantly telling your apprentice, "Yep, I'm going to train you. You think you're powerful enough to kill me? Come on and bring it." So you got to be ready at all times.
That's just bad planning.
One to hold the power, another to claim it.
Mm-hmm.
Or to one to hold the power, another to I don't remember. I remember now. What was it?
I remember something about one to act as bait to the Force, or to the dark side, and then one to have the power of the dark side. It just seems like poor planning on the Sith's part. Like, why would I want to become a Sith if I'm training someone to kill me?
Because you don't think they're going to do it. You don't think they're going to win. That's what I find. This is what I loved about the depiction of the Sith in this, is the thing that Lucas introduced in Revenge of the Sith is this ham-handedly, don't get me wrong, but this quest for immortality. And you see it in these characters. These are characters of pure self-interest, right? They're completely selfish. And so, like, how to put it? they're so when faced with the idea of their own mortality, what they're thinking is, one, they know that there's no Jedi heaven waiting for them. They're just going to be annihilated. But mostly what they know is that they don't, because they're so self-centered, they can't conceive of a galaxy in which they do not exist. And so it seems like all of them, when they get to a certain point in their lives, get obsessed with this idea of living forever, of holding on to power forever. And it tracks across, and we're going to get into this later about the expanded universe versus canon, but it tracks, to me, what I love about this book is it tracks in both ways. It tracks in the expanded universe and it tracks in new canon about this quest for immortality, and the fact that they each one of them, they presented in this, like, once they get obsessed with immortality, which is even more kind of, ironic since being a Sith tends to make you fragile. Every Sith Lord ends up with some kind of scarring, or, if you look at, obviously Vader's the poster child, but in this, Plagueis has gets his face half ripped off and has a mask, and eventually Palpatine is going to get all turned into a prune by Mace Windu. And even if you go into the old comic books with things like Darth Krayt in Star Wars Legacy, the idea that the being a member of the dark side has a cost to your body. And so I really love that in this book, and it really takes those scenes in Revenge of the Sith about Anakin trying to save Padme. Again, those scenes are bad. I was thinking, wouldn't it be so much better if she had been sick? But that's a whole nother thing. And she had said, well, I will, because she's selfless in the way the Jedi are. Like a Sith would never do what Kanan Jarrus does at the end of Rebels, right?
Yeah.
A Sith would never do that. It wouldn't even occur to them to do that. It wouldn't even cross their mind.
Well, it's that Sith arrogance too. Every Sith believes they are the last of the line. They're the one that's going to ascend and be, the emperor, what have you, forever. And every time you've got an apprentice that thinks, nope, I'm the one that's going to be that part, and then murder happens.
Yeah, and then eventually one of them wins out.
Mm-hmm.
Sidious goes through a handful of apprentices eventually, so he has a pretty good run, considering he outlives multiple apprentices. But go ahead.
And it's not anymore, but he's not killed by an apprentice.
Right. Yeah. Kind of, but it's very, I don't know. I just like this depiction of the Sith in their, I understand about the rule of two, but the rule of two is, at this point in the story, how far back is Darth Bane from this story? How great was it, by the way? I hadn't read a expanded universe novel in a long time. All the names came flooding back to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was so cool. It was all these old Jedi, Exar Kun and Darth, was it Xana, Bane's apprentice, right? They just so many names flashing back to me that don't show up anymore. That was I thought was super cool. It was a nice little rush going back to the expanded universe for a second. But I don't know. I really like the depiction of the Sith in this book. I think I believe the psychology of them is reasonable and compelling in this. I bought it. Like I was like, yeah, this is why these guys act this way. They are beings of pure self-interest. And when you're facing the grave, when you start thinking about your own mortality, well, the world can't exist without me. I don't want to give up power. When a Jedi, you talked about Qui-Gon's search for immortality, but their immortality is they become one with the Force and then they help people.
Mm-hmm.
There's almost a selfless part to it where they actually should maybe rest, but they stick around to help people.
Mm-hmm. And they share how to do it.
Yes, yes, instead of coveting it.
Right.
That's the word. One to hold the power, another to covet it. That's the word. Sorry. But so that's the part of the book. I like all the Trade Federation stuff, and that stuff's really cool. But the Sith stuff is the stuff that I absolutely loved.
Well, and I think what keeps the fact that this is not an action book, what keeps it from getting slow or bogged down is the characterizations. Like even Maul in his arrogance thinks that he can go off and defeat everybody when he's never been tested against anyone except non-Force users. So the characterizations to me are what keep it from becoming a slower book with all of that banking clan nonsense. Not that it's nonsense, but it keeps it from being an action book.
Well, the characterizations are great. The characters are all really well drawn. I was jealous because I really wanted to write the biography of Palpatine, so I was really upset when this book came out. But it's perfect. It's exactly, it's great. The way Palpatine is constructed, I believe that he's the guy that we meet later.
Mm-hmm.
Or not later, since this book actually overlaps with Phantom Menace.
It does, and that was one of the first things that struck me about this book is in the prologue takes place just after he's killed Darth Plagueis, And you find out that it happened during the movies.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain at which point in which movie he kills him, but Darth Plagueis is alive during the prequels. And
it
had not occurred to me before, because the way he describes it to Anakin, he made it sound like a legend, so I assumed it would be something old that happened, 20 years ago at least, that he killed his master, not like, oh yeah, did I tell you, you ever hear the story about my master I killed last month?
Yeah. No, I mean, it was 10 years ago by that point, or 12, 13 years ago at that point, because he dies during the Phantom Menace.
Yeah, he dies during the Battle of Naboo. It's going on at that point.
Because after he kills him, Palpatine feels Maul die.
Mm-hmm.
So he may definitely sync that up. So and again, Palpatine's a lying bastard. He's telling Anakin a story, and he's trying to do it without inserting himself into it, although he's really obvious about it. But by making it a quote unquote legend, he's just telling him a story. I watched that scene today after I finished the book. It's still a good scene. The Squid Lake scene.
Yeah.
It's a good scene, though. I think the best McDiarmid is in the prequels. And I find it actually a compelling scene in a story. And, and I do think Not From a Jedi is a great line.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. And he plays it so well.
Such a good moment.
That facial expression he makes when he says it.
Yeah.
He reels him right in.
Yeah, he does. He does.
Speaking of Darth Maul, this really, it came out, you're right, when Clone Wars was getting started.
Yeah.
But, this really is one of the first times we've seen that poor Darth Maul is just shit upon by everybody. He really is so tragic. He thinks he's going to be the guy, and that's just not going to happen. And I imagine, that Lucas is pretty, infamous for having backstories for all the characters. So I wonder how much he either shared with Luciano or told him about Darth Maul and that he's supposed to be this kind of more tragic character.
I don't know. I mean, I liked what I find interesting about Maul in this and other depictions as well is that, but in this where he was, and we talk about this, it's kind of a dumb part of the book where some random woman on Dathomir just gives Palpatine a baby.
Yeah.
It turns out to be Maul. But because he was raised as a baby, he actually doesn't have I don't think he has the ambition that other Sith have. He doesn't have any attachments other than to his master. In Maul, Palpatine creates a different type of Sith apprentice. He creates one that's just pure anger, pure rage, and pure vengeance against the Jedi. But you never get a sense at this stage that Maul wants to run the galaxy, that Maul wants to kill Sidious. He doesn't create that because he's basically his father, because he doesn't remember any other existence. So it is interesting that Maul is also kind of unique in that way. He didn't come into it later. He's not a fallen Jedi. He's not someone that slid into this when he was a teenager like Sidious was. He was a baby.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. He's a rough go of it.
Well, and he seems to, going along with that, he exists outside of this set rule of two. You don't feel that Maul thinks he's going to rise up against Palpatine. That's just not in him. No, and Palpatine's kind of banking on that, I think. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Palpatine knows that. He creates this. He's a weapon, not a challenger. And in Maul in Clone Wars and how he's, evolved after his first death is that he does get more ambitious, but he's still never wanting to take over the galaxy or bring back the Sith Order. That's not his thing. So it's just a fascinating. I don't know. You're right. He's a very unique apprentice. And I found the characterization of Maul, even though, and we'll talk about this later, it conflicts a little bit with what we now know about Maul. It's still a cool depiction of him.
Well, what else?
Well, I appreciate going back to another thing making the prequels better is a deeper and far more satisfying explanation of midichlorians. because the way Plagueis talks about them and manipulates them and the power he has over them and the way he describes them and the way he can feel them ebbing out of people as he kills them, it makes me not hate midichlorians as much, which I didn't know would be possible.
I've never hated midichlorians.
Me neither.
I think it's an interesting idea.
It's a bad scene.
It is.
It's a bad scene in the movie.
Well, it's badly done and poorly explained.
Yes.
Yeah. But this really gives you, like, again, a good separation between how the Sith do things and how the Jedi do things. Whereas the Jedi work with the midichlorians and, view them as more of this holy thing that they communicate with as a basically almost a symbiotic relationship, like they say, versus the Sith who control. Like, I dominate, you do what I say.
Yeah, they want to enslave the midichlorians.
Right.
Yeah, I always thought, you can read into it what you want, but it's always been the case ever since the original, ever since A New Hope. It's been Luke's got potential as a Jedi because his dad did. So that means it's in the blood. Mm-hmm. I know to some people that's like eugenics type stuff, and you can do whatever you want with that. But the fact is, it's always been in the blood. So when people were like, "Oh, that doesn't make any sense. Anybody can be a Jedi." No, they cannot. And yeah, maybe we didn't need in Phantom Menace a technical explanation for it.
We didn't need a women's razor to take some blood and make a call.
They were working on a shoestring budget. Okay, so. But I think so. But I do agree that in this that leads into my thing I wanted to talk about was Anakin.
Yeah, this is the first time that really gets brought up.
And it's different than I remembered.
Yeah.
I remembered it completely differently, but reading through this again, I kept going back. I was like, where's the scene where Plagueis creates Anakin? I'm like, oh no, that was in my brain.
Yeah.
The Force creates Anakin to screw with Plagueis.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Sith are acting crazy, so it creates Anakin to stop that. But yeah, I was reading it too, like, wait, which one of them creates Anakin?
Yeah, no, I thought
neither one is the answer.
No, I mean, Plagueis does by his own foul deeds, right? And the Force pushes back against him. Mm-hmm. And because Plagueis is big in creating life with the midichlorians, he turns into after his injury. Again, it's that thing. He saw his own mortality when he gets ambushed that one time and gets his face chopped off and everything. That he goes and retreats to his own little planet and he turns into Dr. Moreau, basically. And he's sitting out there with his, he's impregnating animals and trying to clone stuff and everything. And so so his experimentation with the midichlorians and trying to do as what Palpatine would call things that are unnatural, made the Force upset. Now, I'll admit I'm not always a fan of Force as a sentient being, as a sentient thing that does things like this. But if we're going to accept that, then I think this is a cool way to explain Anakin.
I almost don't think of it as like the Force being a sentient thing, but more like, that's the best way to explain it without saying it's a Force.
Because Star Wars.
That it's like the cosmic kind of consciousness almost. That
right.
In this world, that's how it is. And what's weird is like even the new movies play with that. Like they call it The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
And so that's still around, but they never really talk about it. That, it's the Force puts these things out into the universe and reacts to things. Probably not consciously, but it's just how that universe works. And I like seeing that.
Well, it's kind of karma-like too, right? They're putting bad in, so good's coming out. Mm-hmm. It's all about balance. Right?
Well, and it goes back to like the Sith having those deformities. Like when you force yourself upon this kind of cosmic thing and you do things that are unnatural by forcing control on them, bad things happen to you.
There's a physical price to it.
Right.
At the very least. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the Sith do not humanize, but characterize the dark side in a sentient being like fashion. So if they're going to do that with the dark side, I think it has to be done with the light side as well.
No, I agree. It just feels like it's all about. But you might be right. It's they create bad, and so good has to happen somewhere.
It's a balance.
In balance, which is what it's all about anyway. And they're kind of. I mean, does the whole story of the prequels come down to Yoda misread a prophecy or Qui-Gon misread a prophecy? Like the whole thing is balance of the Force, and not one of them stopped to think about what balance of the Force meant.
Yeah.
Right. Which is what I always thought Rise of Skywalker was going to be finally about, was a final balance.
Right.
But they just let that.
It kind of was. I mean,
yeah.
It is. I mean, there are no hot Sith. You're right. So they definitely all. I mean, Kylo Ren's not a Sith. So they all end up getting messed up pretty bad, including Maul. So it is. I don't know. I said I love the depiction of the dark side in this book, not as like a raving madman evil, but it's more calculated. I don't know. I really like that part of it.
Evil is politics and capitalism. Yeah. That's what you learn in this book.
I'm not gonna say that, but I'm trying. There were certain similarities to the modern world in it. I'll say
there certainly are.
There are. Luke, and the fact is, Lucas is writing from history. The politics especially in the prequels are based on history. They're based in Roman history. They're based in German history. All sorts of so. It would only make sense that these things would have parallels to the real world as well.
I do like they included kind of a parallel with Palpatine too, with Plagueis being Hugo Damask, that they all, at least the Sith in this book, maintain this public persona that's still entrenched in power. You know what I mean?
Well, they love stuff. They do love stuff. They are materialists.
Yeah, they don't hide. They've been there the whole time. And they talk about teaching. Plagueis teaches him how to hide himself from the Jedi, and how to mask what's going on with him. Which again, helps with the prequels. That funeral scene. He's sitting right there with a hood up. Come on, people. But he's been taught how to mask himself.
Well, and that's one of the phrases I really liked, is that he mentions over and over again the mundane world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I just love that phrase for some reason, because it explains how and why they are able to cloak themselves.
Do you know who doesn't have a double identity?
Dorothy Maul.
Maul, and he even talked about it in the book.
Yeah.
That's another thing that makes him stand apart. He is only that vessel. He doesn't have another part. Dooku is a count. They all have something.
He should have thought twice before he got those face tattoos. It's just like in the real world. You don't get a tattoo pointing you out as a bad guy. You're marked then.
You're not going into politics with that face.
Yeah, it's also hard to get a job. Yeah, it's true. It's real hard to get another line of work with a face like that.
So here's something that popped into my head while I was rereading, and having recently watched all the prequels. Do you guys think that Anakin's dreams with Padme dying, do you think they're true visions, or do you think they were actually sent by Palpatine to push him?
I went down this hole today, actually. Because I had the thought, like I mentioned earlier, that how much cooler would it have been, say, if Padme had been sick and she had been told that, listen, if you carry these babies to term, there's a good chance you won't survive the birth. And she commits this kind of selfless act, and Anakin says, no, we're going to save you. And that leads into that part. But then the only thing that made me stop to think that would be better is the dream. Hayden Christensen's shirtless acting notwithstanding. Is the it could be. I don't know. I think it's hard to say because she does die. So I don't know. That's why prophecies and future dreams are always tough to work with, But what is it in the sequel trilogy? Isn't Snoke or Palpatine kind of feeding Kylo and Rey a little bit there for a while.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
well, it's the Emperor the whole time.
yeah. Which makes sense to me, and we'll talk about that later. But I don't know. I think it could be, or at least I don't know.
What do you think, Ryan?
It's always been one of those things where, is it a real vision, or is it Anakin has broken the rules? He's broken that attachment rule, and this is kind of the result of that. Like, in his mind, he's obsessed with, what if I lose this person? What if I lose this person? And that's what's starting to drift him to the dark side. And a result of that is these visions he's having.
Right. Is it self-fulfilling, or is it a premonition?
Mm-hmm.
Or does it matter? Is it just kind of feeding itself?
Yeah. And they talk about that a lot in Jedi Lost, which we'll talk about eventually, I'm sure. But with Sifo-Dyas, because he has all these visions constantly of things going bad, and there's questions of, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? He saw this and now it's happened, or are we reading it wrong?
Right. See, I like seeing Sifo-Dyas. I like seeing Valorum. Just all sorts of like cool little, kind of like when we read Master and Apprentice in the other timeline, but in this one it just gives us a really nice snapshot of Coruscant before Phantom Menace and what we're walking into, and setting up some of the key characters and everything. And I really enjoy that. Even Padme, you find out how Padme gets, elected, and things like that, and how they have, the idea that Damask is this big, and I think even Tenebrous was like a starship designer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you said they all had jobs, I
like the tie-in with Camino too. That Camino is from early experimentations, or how they kind of got hooked up with them was them figuring out this, well, what if we clone some bodies and transfer into them? Right. And from that figured out, well, we can also make some clone troopers.
So the cloning brings up a theory that I ran across, and you guys have probably read this theory too. Is Snoke a botched clone of Darth Plagueis?
Does he look like a mun?
It's just an internet rumor floating around out there that people are talking about.
That was a big thing when Force Awakens came out and we first saw the hologram of Snoke. I don't know. He doesn't look exactly like a mun, but we know all the clones they grew were kind of messed up.
He doesn't have the forehead for it.
Right.
No, he doesn't look like a mun, but that's why I'm saying like maybe he's a botched clone. I don't know.
Well, the Rise of Skywalker book, though, pretty much says that the Emperor was making clones of himself.
Yeah, but the Snoke isn't necessarily a clone of himself, though. Like, he was making clones of himself, but we don't know if that's what Snoke is.
Oh, I assumed it was.
Yeah, because I thought Snoke, he was making someone to go out and infiltrate. So he wouldn't want it to look like him.
Yeah. I also always figured that little black ring on his finger was some sort of like Sith artifact that was like a leash to Palpatine. But that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, might be. That's part of the fun.
All right. Any other thoughts or anything you guys would like to say about the book before we get into our further discussions?
Book's awesome.
Yeah.
It really is. And I think it's a good read, especially because you see how far they were going for the immortality and all the things they tried and, the cost of it. So you see that this has been going on for a long time versus, especially if you kind of consider parts of this in canon, it doesn't make the Emperor surviving the end of Return of the Jedi as much a big deal because you see this was worked on forever.
Well, to transition us into the next section, it works both ways because in the expanded universe, there was the Dark Empire saga in comics where, Dark Empire was a comic that came out, 92? I think. And it was there was Dark Empire 2, and then Empire's End, which I think was only 2 issues long, and the others were like 5. And it told the story of the reborn emperor. That's why when we were talking about Rise of Skywalker, and they're like, oh, he transferred his essence into a clone halfway across the galaxy. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's how he would do that, because that's how he did it in Dark Empire. The setup for Dark Empire is exactly the same as the setup for Rise of Skywalker, as far as how Palpatine gets to where he is. And so while Lucino was writing in that timeline where the Emperor had returned, and so he was doing a lot to reinforce making the connection from episode 3 and Luke and his obsession with immortality and Vader's obsession with immortality all the way to Dark Empire. You know, he didn't know that it would get erased and 30 years later they do the same story. But it still works in that way, because it is that continuing thread of these guys wanting to hold on to power so much and their desire to do anything to stay out of the grave and live forever. I think works in both new canon and an expanded universe. So I think it's kind of cool. Yeah.
I think one thing I really like about this book too, a lot of times in expanded universe books, whether it's new canon or legends, it often feels like to tie into the movies, there's a lot of hoops they jump through. And there's a lot of kind of ham-fisted tie-in. This book is so seamless how it slides into the movies and doesn't make you feel like there's this big scene that's happening off that we should have seen. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, those hoops are there. You just can't see them.
Right. And there was no reason to see those in the movie.
Yeah.
But it feels important in this book.
You don't ever get the impression, like with reading a newer Timothy Zahn book, that you don't feel like somebody's hands were tied. Mm-hmm. Even if they were tied, you don't feel it, and it doesn't come across as, well, he had to do it this way because somebody was telling him you can't do anything else.
Right. And, I mean, part of that may be Revenge of the Sith had come out. You know, Clone Wars was happening, but I don't think they were as worried about canon at that point. And so, I mean, at that point, they don't know sequel movies are coming. The story's kind of halted at the time. So that might make it a little easier.
Well, the live action story's halted. They still had dozens and dozens of books coming.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, no, there was, it does have the feeling of I think we said earlier, a book that, all right, we're done with the prequels. Have at it.
Yeah, fill it in.
I'm still waiting for that from the sequel trilogy. I'm waiting for this book from the sequel trilogy. I'm waiting for a book that just lets us to just, or a series of books or a whole bunch of books that just dive into the 30 years between Jedi and Force Awakens and start telling those stories.
I just want an Enfys Nest book. I really do.
I want a Kira book.
Yeah.
But, you know, I really want a Kira book. But I also want to know, I mean, The Mandalorian is the first of those stories, right? Mm-hmm. We're getting The Mandalorian as a post-Jedi story. If they're going to spin off Ahsoka and Sabine from Mandalorian, then that'll be another post-Jedi story, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and eventually the comics will get there. You know, the comics, the main Star Wars book did its first run for before A New Hope. Or no, after New Hope, excuse me. And now it's kind of in Empire territory. So eventually it's going to get there.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, I want to see that era. I want them to do that here, you know, whether it's Snoke or whoever.
With all the lockdowns, I don't see authors having much excuse not to continue doing their work. Whereas, you know, Hollywood, of course, is shut down, but you can still sit at home and write your books.
Yeah, but the comics industry shut down too.
Yeah.
My friend, I have a friend who's a comic book writer. He's doing commissions right now because his book got halted. You know, even though it seems like they could keep doing their work, but no, they're not. They're not releasing comics right now, and they're not making them. So yep. It's affecting everybody. I don't agree with their decision not to release their books digitally, but as someone who only reads digitally these days, I feel shafted. Because it's like, they're like, well, we want to save the stores. And so, which I don't think it's going to save the stores, but we want to save the stores. So we're not releasing them digitally because everyone will move to digital. I'm like, yeah, I was already buying digital. So I just have the books that you promised me? Because I know they're done, that I have the subscriptions for. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Much like in 9 months, there's going to be a whole lot of babies. I feel like in 9 months, we should have a whole lot of books. Not just comic books, but like books. We should have some new novels.
A whole lot of first babies. A whole lot of first babies. There will be no third babies born in 9 months.
No.
Yeah.
You get first babies and divorces.
Uh-huh.
I think the divorce rate in China jumped up. They said, like, I don't blame them. Like, yeah. I mean, it's that. But yeah, there's no one that has 2 kids is going like, oh yeah, this is making me want to have another. No, not happening. Not happening. So we want to move on to our last kind of mini subject here.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about the very few things that keep this book from being canon, because it's very few things.
So what is the big? So the first question is, could this book be canon?
I think, except for Darth Maul, his origin, and then Beth, what's the other one? There's one more.
Oh, it was the and it's a tiny one that could easily be worked around. Is the inclusion of he has in his Darth Plagueis has in his Chamber of Horrors. He's got a few Isalamiri and Ronskers, which are from the old Thrawn books and are no longer canon. But I feel like they could work around that pretty easily.
Or they could just this book could just make them canon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed too, there were a few references to the true Mandalorians, and that's not something that's a thing anymore.
Uh-huh.
And I know, all apologies to Dave, I know he loves Karen Travis's Mandalorian stuff. I like Filoni's Mandalorian stuff so much more. So losing the whole true Mandalorian thing would not bother me, because that's from Karen Travis's stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was one thing I noticed. It was like, that's not really a thing these days, but it's minor. His name is something. Not this or his name, but the idea that he has abandoned his name.
I mean, in headcanon, we could just say he's embarrassed by Sheev, which
who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
That's completely fair. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the big thing is Darth Maul, the baby Darth Maul versus,
So remind me, what is the new canon origin for how he met Maul?
Well, I was thinking about that, and I was wondering, did they ever actually show him go get Darth Maul in anything that is canon, or am I just assuming how he came to be from watching them go pick up Savage Press?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what it is. I don't know if they've shown it, but it's been talked about. Okay. Because, Mother Talzin, he's with her a little longer versus just this lady, right? Sidious takes him from Mother Talzin when he's younger, but it's not like this lady just gives him a baby.
Yeah.
But that's really the huge difference, which, you could probably write around or just pretend that it's not that big of a deal, which it's really not.
Yeah, see, go ahead.
It makes you wonder, like, they're going to have to, in New Canon at some point, go back to Plagueis and go back to how he rose to power if they're not going to count this book. I mean, don't you think?
I'm not sure they're interested.
Yeah.
I'm not sure this stuff is going to be anything that they're going to dive into. I think that while I've enjoyed a lot of the Disney stuff, I don't think they're interested in things like this. I don't think that because there's still movies and because there's television shows, the books are getting knocked lower and lower down in priority. And most of the books seem to be tied to whatever's happening that year. I mean, we're going to get High Republic books because they're launching the High Republic. I don't think we're going to get a book about Biggs Darklighter. I just don't see that stuff happening anymore. I don't think we're going to get the same in-depth universe, at least through the novels, in the new stuff as we got in the old stuff. I just don't think it's possible. And I don't think they're necessarily that interested in it. I would love it. I would love to read it. Maybe someone will take hold of it one day, but they're also so desperate to move past the Skywalker saga in some ways, and in other ways they aren't, because here comes Boba Fett. But I don't know. I'm not sure they have to do that. That's why this book to me is still kind of in my head canon, because just like Tales of the Jedi and Knights of the Old Republic in my head are still canon. Because like, why not? They don't affect anything.
Yeah. Well, and what's kind of interesting is the Tarkin book that Luciano wrote references this book, at least parts of it. I mean, 11D4, who was Plagueis and then Palpatine's droid, is still around. Plagueis is brought up several times, and it is said in the Tarkin book that Palpatine was still the apprentice when he was appointed Naboo's representative to the Senate. So, it seems like they're going to try to kind of have it both ways and just kind of slyly reference this book as, this stuff kind of happened. Maybe not exactly what's in there, but the basics of it still went on.
Isn't Tarkin one of those cusp books, though? Wasn't it? I feel like it was started before.
Yes.
It changed over. So,
yeah, it was. And
they just decided to keep it canon because it came out after the I would keep calling it the takeover, like it's Hong Kong, but the sale to Disney. And so yeah, I mean, that stuff's very muddled. The thing that, and I hit on it earlier, that I thought really makes it work in canon is the fact that while it's setting up, to me, the events of Dark Empire, even though Dark Empire doesn't exist anymore, we have Rise of Skywalker. And the idea that Palpatine, in the years since he kills Plagueis, he dies, he kills Plagueis in such a brutal way, right? He basically turns off his air supply and lets him suffocate. Is that he thinks he's a doddering old fool, and he thinks he's obsessed with immortality. But in the intervening years, as Palpatine has gotten older, as he's been more worn down, he started to think about it too. So the idea that he would set up a contingency plan, continue with the cloning, things like that, I don't know. To me, that fits right in with the narrative that we have now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And little details here or there. I mean, listen, if you want to talk about little details, the Ahsoka novel, the first chapter of the Ahsoka novel is kind of scrapped. They changed a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, true.
And so, the way I've started to think about it is this. Star Wars was created. Lucas's original idea was that these stories were being told to us by the Wills, in the Journal of the Wills, right? This was a history. Well, when you read books about history, they have differing details. I read a lot of Roman history. No one can nobody can agree on like what Caesar's last words were, because it was written in 100 different ways. All I know is it wasn't Shakespeare's. But so I've started to see Star Wars books almost as like, oh yeah, that's the book about Ahsoka, and yeah, it's vaguely the same, but they're just different versions of this ancient history. And so to me, I can handle inconsistencies more that way by just thinking like, no, they're just tales that took place a long time ago. These are historical fiction novels. And if you think of it that way, there being inconsistencies is fine to me. It's just fine.
Well, and when you delve this deeply into a world, your brain can make up for things, and your brain can just make there be a workaround. Like when I was watching Revenge of the Sith for the last time, there was a droid in that final no scene that it matched the physical description of 114D. And I was like, oh, snap. He just destroyed that droid he's had forever that was handed down from Plagueis.
Oh, he's not going to be happy. He's not going to be happy about that. No. I mean,
there is a Sith Force ghost. He is pissed.
I said, as far as canon and not canon, that stuff doesn't, like I was explaining, it doesn't concern me as much anymore. But if we're talking about modern canon and what we consider the new canon, this book is, until they contradict it entirely, this book is going to be canon in my head.
Yeah.
Until they contradict it, because other than said, most of the things you mentioned are little. The Maul thing is fairly major, but most of it does not get in the way at all of the rest of the stories at all.
Yeah. So, and I think we're probably going to see some of that with the books that came out post prequels.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like, Heir to the Empire, obviously not in canon. But, like, Rule of Two, there's not much in there that can't be canon.
No, because most of the stuff, because what have majority of the movies were the sequel trilogy, right? So, like, they're not really contradicting, so any of the stuff that takes place in this kind of unless it directly involves the Clone Wars and contradicts things from the show, because the show definitely has supremacy over the books when it comes to that. But I don't know. I just think, like I said, my favorite Star Wars comic of all time is the original Tales of the Jedi books, and they're still real to me. They're still part of the story to me. And those Darth Bane books. I like those Darth Bane books.
Yeah,
they're really cool. Drew Capuchin. I don't remember his name. It's a weird name. All right. So should we go ahead and wrap it up? I mean, should we? I don't think we have to say whether we recommend this book or not, right?
I feel like everybody's gotten the point that we recommend it. We all recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Chad, why don't...
And to be honest with you, if you need to skim through the Trade Federation stuff, you kind of can if you want to.
Yeah. So, Chad, if you want to tell us what we're doing next.
So, in 1996, Lucasfilm launched an event, right, that was going to tell the story... that told the story between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. What happens in that year or so, from Han Solo being frozen in carbonite to 3PO and R2 showing up at Jabba's palace. And it was a huge event. There was a novel. There were a couple comics. There was a video game. There were toys. And there was even a full orchestral soundtrack on CD. There just wasn't a movie. So next time we're going to talk about Steve Perry's Shadows of the Empire and discuss this, I think, fairly unique project in Star Wars history. And this is the one I really want to talk about, whether or not it should be canon, for more reasons than the text itself.
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk about it, but there seems to be more and more hints that it may be included.
So I hope so. I want to talk about that because if you hold Lucas's stuff sacrosanct, then this is this is something maybe to discuss. So, but we'll talk about that. It's been a while since I've read it, so I'm excited.
And I have yet to read it, so I am very interested to start.
That's gonna be fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Yep.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and we will talk to you guys soon. Thanks, guys, for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening.
See y'all next time.
You have been listening to a Needless Things podcast. You can follow Needless Things on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at needlessthingspodcast.com. Love you. Mean it.